This week, Noir Alley heads across the pond for another film set in England. I'm your host, Eddie Muller, coming to you from bar 355 in Oakland, California. You may need a cocktail, perhaps a Pim's Cup number 2, to help you swallow the premise of this week's offering. It's Stolen Face, another co-production of Britain's Hammer Films and American producer Robert L. Lippert, released in 1952. As was the case with Bad Blonde and Blackout, shown here previously, Hammer handled the production while Lippert arranged for Hollywood actors to headline, ensuring distribution on both sides of the Atlantic. Lippert typically attracted actors who were on the downside of their careers and hungry for work. But in the case of Paul Hunreid, he was already working in Europe, both as an actor and a director, due to his blacklisting in Hollywood. Since 1948, he hadn't made a film at a major U.S. studio, only for independent producers. His co-star, Elizabeth Scott, was certainly not on the downside. She took this gig because it was far more challenging than the parts she was usually offered. She plays 2 characters, which I don't think is spoiling anything, since it is obvious pretty early on where this far-fetched setup is leading. Henry plays a plastic surgeon with something of a god complex, an aspect of his character that is merely glossed over in the script by Martin Berkeley and Richard Landau. The doctor believes that physical beauty can lead to better lives, and he practices his theory on disfigured prison inmates, whom he believes can be rehabilitated through facial reconstruction. A ludicrous notion, until you realize Americans spend an average of $16.7 billion a year on cosmetic surgery. So, in addition to being utterly absurd, the premise of Stolen Face is also weirdly prescient. This isn't the first film to deal with the idea of a new face equaling a new life. Both Ingrid Bergman and Joan Crawford starred in versions of A Woman's Face in 1938 and 41, respectively. That story posed the same question. Can a new face change a person's essential character? This story adds an element of romantic obsession that will remind viewers of a more well-known film, Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, in which a lovelorn guy is compelled to reconstruct his dearly departed. Stolen Face predates, by 2 years, the French novel The Living and the Dead, which was the basis for Hitchcock's 1958 film. Paul Hunreid is his usual suave self, his easy elegance masking the doctor's insufferable arrogance. And I'll note that he smokes more than anybody I've ever seen in a movie, including Robert Mitchum in Out of the Past. And this guy is a doctor. After Hunreid's famous scene with Bette Davis in Now Voyager, tar bars became essential to his on-screen persona. As for Elizabeth Scott, the Brits sure treated her right. Cinematographer Walter J. Harvey lights her so well, she's more gorgeous than in many of her Hollywood films. Plus, she's decked out in one sensational outfit after another, courtesy of Edith Head, which then gets multiplied once she's playing 2 characters. She carries off the wardrobe changes a bit more smoothly than she does the Cockney accent she's obliged to adopt.
That's not me.
If you were here for Blackout 2 weeks ago, I note that this film was made by the exact same production team, since in those days Hammer was essentially a cinematic commando unit, cranking out one B film after another. The notable new addition is Andre Morel, making the first of 9 appearances for Hammer. Noir Alley viewers will surely remember his entertaining turn as Colonel Gore Hepburn opposite Peter Cushing in the holiday heist classic Cash on Demand. Directed by Terence Fisher, who'd later direct Andre Morel as Dr. Watson in 1959's The Hound of the Baskervilles, here is Stolen Face. So does this really fit the bill as film noir? From the start, and especially during the meet-cute passage where Paul Hunreid and Elizabeth Scott have their initial liaison, it feels more like a romantic melodrama. Then the facial reconstruction stuff comes in, and the film turns into something else entirely. It's been described as both sci-fi and horror, but I don't think either of those is particularly apt. But plenty of other face-changing plots, like The Face Behind the Mask, Strange Impersonation, and the previously mentioned A Woman's Face and Vertigo, are considered film noir, so I'm giving Stolen Face honorary status. But if it had ended with Alice, not Lily, tumbling to her death from the train, then you would have had a bona fide 100% noir, one that ends more bleakly than Vertigo. The doc's dream girl is dead, he is responsible, and now he is saddled with the drunken harridan he created in her likeness. Am I sick for wanting that ending instead? This film also gives an inkling of where Hammer was headed. The studio's early 50s thrillers sometimes had a grotesque element lurking around the edges of a traditional mystery story. And by the end of the decade, the horrific stuff would move front and center as Hammer transformed itself into the world's foremost purveyor of cinematic horror, remaking the Universal monster movies of the 1930s with a surfeit of full-color sex and violence. But if you want to see the full-on horror version of this kind of story, check out the 1960 French film Eyes Without a Face by Georges Franju, written, not coincidentally, by Pierre Boileau and Thomas Narchiac, authors of the novel that became Vertigo. I mentioned before the film that Hammer movies of the early 50s were created by a commando unit, with the same behind-the-camera talent working on virtually every film the studio made. Script supervisor Renee Glenn, production coordinator and assistant director Jimmy Sangster, cameraman Walter Harvey, editor Maurice Roots, and producer Tony Hines. Often these films included a nightclub scene, and in this film, the club scene features saxophonist Ronnie Scott, who in 1959 opened a club in Soho bearing his name. It would become legendary as one of the world's great musical hotspots. That's where Jimi Hendrix played his last show in 1970. Paul Henreid would resume making movies in America in 1954, but by then his interest had shifted mainly to directing. He made a few trashy and entertaining B-pictures like Girls on the Loose and Live Fast, Die Young, but most of his work was for television, including numerous episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Lastly, I want to mention Mary McKenzie, who played scar-faced Lily Conover, before some nifty scalpel work turned her into Liz Scott. She does a lot with the character in scant screen time, but a long career was not in the cards. Like Belinda Lee, the star of Blackout, the Hammer film I showed a couple of weeks ago, McKenzie died in a car accident a few years later, at only 44 years of age. Was there some kind of a curse hanging over the actresses in these Hammer films? We'll have a week to ponder that question before I'm back with another Face film. Gene Simmons stars in her only American noir, Angel Face, opposite Robert Mitchum. Howard Hughes and Otto Preminger were involved in its creation, so there is definitely an intriguing story behind its production. Be back here in a week, and I'll tell you all about it. Until then, see you in the shadows.
Next on TCM, Night Moves, then Hot Summer Night, and later, Land of the Pharaohs. TCM's running a pyramid scheme tonight.